This is a Bible Ranger, and today is episode 118, and is refuting Parr, but now this one's specifically for Robert Evans, the gentleman down here. They're both good brothers, okay? And nothing against them personally at all. We're just being a good Berean here and correcting something they said was in the Bible and is, I don't see it supported in the Bible, and I will try to show you that. And we'll be talking about the seals and the trumpets and the bowls, and that's a good study in itself. And Brother Evans here, he's got great hair. I don't know how he does it. I need to know his secret. All right, let's go on. So why do we disagree? Mainly is because between the pre-trib and the post-trib, and I just mentioned those two just to keep it simple because it goes into a bunch of other ones. It's mostly because of the word wrath and because of a timeline of the seals and the bowls and the trumpets, and also personal biases to include childhood issues. You know, like I know a brother, good brother in the Lord, but you trigger him a certain way and he'll remember something that happened in his childhood and he'll just go off. So it's hard to overcome, you know, personal biases. All right, so in a sense, this is like a part 2 of the video of my video 115, which I talked about the wrath, but this kind of adds a little bit more, actually a lot more. So when you go into the Greek, okay, the word wrath itself is actually orge, which is down here, okay? And it's actually mentioned a total of 36 times in the whole New Testament. 31 times it's actually wrath, which is the one we're talking about. Sometimes it's anger, and sometimes it's vengeance, and sometimes it's indignation. And out of more than 86% of the time, that is mentioned in the New Testament is actually wrath, the one we're using. So these are definitions. When you look into the Greek, by the way, I recommend you go to the Blue Bible, Letter Bible. It's free. All they ask for is donations if you want to give something. But it's a tremendous amount of resources there. You don't even have to know Greek. But it really helps you open up the Bible in a new way. So going back to Mr. Robert Evans, he mentions that the wrath of God it's the whole tribulation, the whole 7-year tribulation. And that's not in the Bible. He uses a verse from the seals of number 6, but we'll get into that shortly. So if you notice, if you look at all the definitions and how they're used, there's nothing here about tribulation. It's just talking about the actual word. So we have to read a little bit more than just a verse. We have to read in content. So of course, it's not just one verse, right? So the question is, does the word wrath, could you replace it with eternal punishment, basically hell, or like a 7-year tribulation? And we'll test that out. So if you would press right here where it says wrath 31 times, it'll show you all the times that is used in the Bible, the actual word wrath. And this is what we're going to do right now. So now we're going to use, I can't show you all 31 of them. So I picked the one that they're all come in a row, you know, in biblical order. So I used a book that's kind of neutral, like the Romans. There's something called the Romans Road. It's a term that we use to bring people that are not saved to the Lord because it has a lot of salvation in it. Everybody knows that. It's basically the book of Romans is you're not saved by the law, but by Jesus Christ. So it's not talking about prophecy at all. So it's a lot easier to see. I think this was a good example. So we'll use just 3 of them, okay? We'll use the first one here, Romans 1:18. It says, for the wrath, or orge, right, of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodly and unrighteous, basically sinners, of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So it's all about sin, unrighteousness, the truth in unrighteousness, ungodliness. So let's replace the word now with either eternal punishment or the tribulation, okay? So the 7-year tribulation of God is revealed from heaven to all the sinners? That doesn't make sense. Okay, but the eternal punishment or hell is revealed to all those who are sinners. That fits perfectly. Now let's go to Romans 2:8. And it says, but unto them that are contentious and do not obey the truth, basically they're sinners, but obey unrighteousness, indignation, and wrath. So it's telling you there's going to be a punishment for the sinners, the basically unrepentant sinners. So indignation and wrath for them, in other words, indignation or hell, or indignation and 7-year tribulation. Obviously, eternal punishment fits in there perfectly. And that's the same word that is used, and that's what the argument is about, orge. And we'll use this one here, Romans 5:9. There's something special about that verse, that if you go one verse before that is Romans 5:8. And basically that's the famous verse that everybody uses, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So it's definitely talking about salvation. So if you read the next verse, 5:9, it says, how much then, being now justified by his blood, in other words, the blood of Jesus, which is the way we get saved, we shall be saved from the wrath through him, from the 7-year tribulation. Does that make sense? Or from the eternal punishment from hell. That makes perfect sense. We're talking about salvation, and the book of Romans is about salvation. So eternal punishment fits perfectly into that. So I'm just showing you verses, when you use the word orge, that eternal punishment is mostly the place where eternal punishment is going to fit. Now, when we're talking about prophecy, if we're totally honest, Mr. Evans, he's studied it for years, just a few more years than I have, and myself. It's a little myopic at times when you do prophecy. Let me explain what I mean. Look at these products here. There's about 10 bottles here. And if you were to line up, this is the best picture I can find. If you were to line up all the bottles in a straight line, all you can basically see is one of them, but they're hiding 10 other bottles behind them. It's kind of what prophecy does sometimes, especially about the coming of Christ. It's kind of myopic. It's what you can see in front of you, but not necessarily behind you. And I'll give you some examples. Jesus, in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 and 7, is the famous verse that we use for Christmas, that a child was born and he's given unto us. Basically, in the Old Testament, it's talking about the Messiah being born. Everybody knows that verse. The next verse, verse 7, it basically says he's going to come to rule in judgment and in justice forever. So now you're Jewish, okay? And this is not a verse. They have a scroll, and it's in the same paragraph. And basically it says that the Messiah is going to be born, and then he's going to rule forever. You know, if you're in the Roman times and you're getting oppressed by the Romans, you're like, yes, Jesus is born. Here he is. He's going to take over the government. You're going to believe this. First of all, because you have personal biases, because you're being controlled by the Romans. And now because the verse is not really clear. It's kind of myopic, because it seems like it's saying once the Messiah is born, he's going to basically rule with an iron fist, which he is. But there's a gap of 2,000 years between the first verse and the second verse. Now, even in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, when he goes into the synagogue and he opens up the scroll to Isaiah 61, verse 1 and verse 2, and basically I'm shortening it up. But basically it says, the first verse says, I come to preach and to heal and to set the captives free. And the next verse, which he did not read, it says that it's a day of vengeance, which is a day of wrath, and comfort all those who are in mourning. Jesus did not read that last part because he only came in two parts. He came, the first part, he only came in to heal and to preach and to set the captives free spiritually. The reason he didn't read the second part is because there's a 2,000-year gap between Jesus' first coming and the second coming, assuming he's going to come very soon. So you can see what I mean is some prophecy, especially the coming of Christ, there's a myopicness to that. You see what's in front of you, but you can't necessarily see what's behind you. And you know what? This is to our benefit, because if you're Gentile out there, we and the Jews would have accepted Jesus as the Messiah when he came on the donkey, we wouldn't be saved. So us being saved, Gentiles, was part of the plan anyway. So the Jews being blinded for a period of time in part is part of the big plan. So after Jesus proclaimed that he was the Messiah, he basically said that this word was fulfilling your ears, and they wanted to stone him or push him off the cliff. 40 years after that, the local Romans killed 1 million Jews. So obviously he didn't come to comfort them yet. 40 years later is when they destroyed the temple. And when they destroyed the temple is when they killed about 1 million Jews. So I believe that this is done to keep Satan confused. Okay, now why is God doing this? Why is he making it so difficult? Okay, to keep Satan confused, because there's a verse in the Bible that if Satan knew that he was going to raise, Jesus was going to raise from the dead, he wouldn't have pushed to have Jesus killed. And of course, another benefit to that is us Gentiles would not have been saved, because it would have been just the Jews back then. And it keeps Satan off balance, so he won't spoil God's plan. I mean, Satan is always trying to spoil God's plan. He did that before the flood. He tried to taint, or he tainted, almost all the blood of all the humans in the world except the people in the ark. So Robert Evans states that the 7-year tribulation is the wrath, the entire 7-year tribulation, as a fact. He says, using only the Bible. And he did use the Bible, but he didn't steer you right. Okay, like I said, the man's a good man, okay? And he tries to be gentle when he talks against other teachings other than the Pre-trib. He tries to be gentle, but it's hard to when you're disagreeing with somebody, right? So he read the 6th seal. Now, I'm not trying to be oversimplistic, but it's the 6th seal. There's seal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in there. So let's continue. All right, now I'm going to try to prove to you that the wrath of God starts at the second coming of Christ. Not in the tribulation. There's definitely pain and suffering, and the Bible calls it the beginning of birth pains. So before you have the baby, let's say the coming of Christ, the baby, you're going to have birth pains, and it hurts quite a bit. Anybody who's seen their wife giving birth, they know that hurts quite a bit. Number 2, I'm going to try to show you that the rapture is obviously true, but it's part of the second coming, and it's for the living Christians at the second coming. Because the whole book of, or a majority of the book of Thessalonians, that they knew about the second coming of Christ. But what about the people that are alive? What about us? And he basically says that, well, I'll cover that later. Part 3, I'm going to try to show you that the second coming of Christ is the first resurrection. And in the Bible, there's only 2 resurrections. There's the resurrection of the living and the resurrection of the dead, or the damned. Now, the Old Testament is full of verses of the Messiah coming, full of verses, okay? But none of them talk about a rapture or a secret coming, or like a 2-part rapture. None. There's nothing like that in the Bible. Nothing. Isaiah, now I'll give you a couple of verses of what I'm talking about. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 19. Because of the fear of judgment, men were hiding in caves and in mountains. This later on, I'll show you that this is part of the wrath of God, where they actually go into the mountains and they're just fearing what Christ is going to do to them, because he has come and they've seen him. So obviously it's not something that happens right away. They need logistically time to get to the mountains and get to strategic areas to hide in caves and mountains, underground passages, to try to hide away from Christ's wrath. Another verse in Joel, verse 2 and then verse 31, it gives you what I call pivot points in the Bible, where you can, if you're lost, you get these points right here, and you can kind of, like a compass or a string on a centerpiece, you can kind of draw a circle. It kind of gives you a place, a reference place to start. So Joel 2, verse 10 and 31, it talks about the sun and the moon will darken. There'll be earthquakes, and there's heavenly issues or cosmic issues going on before the day of the Lord. Before. Remember that. Before the day of the Lord. So this is in the 7-year tribulation. So now we go to Matthew, and we'll cover this verse. These verses are really powerful, so I'll have to bring them back, okay? But in verses 29 to 31, I shortened it up, but it says after the tribulation, and basically before the day of the Lord, the sun and the moon darkened, and there'll be heavenly issues or cosmic issues. And then it's the second coming of Christ, and the men will be hiding in the mountains and basically caves, and there'll be a trumpet, and there's basically a rapture, but the rapture is for the living, okay? And I'm saying that this is the first resurrection, and I'm going to show you that the Bible is saying this too. All right, now about the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. This is probably the most difficult part of Revelation. Nobody, and I'll repeat, nobody has this down packed 100%, including myself. And Evans admits this, and Alan Parr admits this too, somewhere in his teachings. This is very difficult to get the timing of the rapture, of the seals and the trumpets and the bowls, because it's got that myopicness to it. For example, the way it reads, if you were to read it chronologically, it reads that you have 7 seals, and then at the end of 7 seals, it opens up and you have 7 trumpets, and at the end, it reads that you have 7 bowls. So it looks like it has 21 punishments. But if you look at the words and you look at all the pivot points and the references, it doesn't read like that. So if you were to read it chronologically, I mean, Jesus comes like 6 times in Revelation. We know he doesn't do that. We know he comes one other time other than being born. That's all he comes. So let me try to show you that. So Matthew 24 and Revelation chapter 6 are parallel chapters. They both talk about the 6th seal, which is what Robert Evans spoke about, and they match up beautifully. So in Revelation 6:12, it talks about that the sun and the moon will be darkened and you'll have an earthquake. And then the next verse talks about heavenly issues or cosmic issues. And then verse 14 talks about that the mountains and the islands will move. This tremendous earthquake that is just going to pulverize the islands and pulverize the mountains. And then verse 15 talks about that they were hiding in the mountains. And verse 16, they're saying mountains fall on us because we're scared of the wrath that Jesus is going to bring us. And if you think about it, just these verses alone, these 5 verses, really it should be read backwards, because they have to be underneath the mountain first and hiding once the mountains start shaking and falling and the islands move, it's going to be too late for these people to say that. So even reading this, it kind of reads backwards. Continuing. Verse 17, it says, the Bible says that who's going to stand, who's going to be able to stand against the wrath. And this is the reason Robert Evans is saying that we're not going to be here, which I get that, because the wrath is so bad that nobody's going to be able to survive. First of all, there will be people surviving. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about that if the days weren't cut short, nobody would survive. It's not saying that the 7-year period is going to be turned to 5 years. It's still going to be 7 years. But the time of punishment of the wrath of Christ, if he continued his wrath, everybody would die. All right. So going back to Matthew 24:31, if you were to compare Revelation 6 and Matthew 24, you can see the matches. I try to do colors to match it, but it is difficult. I do have a chart that does that for me. So here we go. Matthew 24 talks about men hiding in the mountains down here. There it is. Verse 16, men hiding in the mountains. It talks about the second coming. Well, there it is. It talks about the fear of the wrath of Jesus, because now they see, the sinners are seeing Jesus, so it's the second coming. And there's a trumpet. It doesn't mention a trumpet up there. It talks about heavenly issues right here. There's the heavenly issues of the cosmic issues. And there's matches all over the place. And right here is the sun and the moon darkened. Right here is 7, the sun and the moon darkened. So it's a perfect match. Okay, when I mean perfect, I mean it's nearly perfect match. So Revelation 6 and Matthew 24 go together. Now the 7th seal, which is in Revelation chapter 8, verses 1 and 5, there's a silence in heaven. It's about 30-minute silence. And they say something like, there were voices and lightnings and thunders. And most of them say earthquakes. Okay, but just like Matthew 24 and Mark and Luke, they all have an Olivet discourse of Christ. They don't all match perfectly, but one adds to another, because they're not copying from each other. This is how the Spirit revealed truths to them. Okay. All right. Now, continuing, the 7th trumpet. Now, watch this. The 7th trumpet. On chapter 11 of Revelation, verse 15, it talks about the voices. They proclaim that, now is the kingdom of Jesus. Verse 18, it says that Jesus is coming, and basically his wrath is coming with him, and there's a reward for the saints. So the reward is at the coming of Jesus, the second coming. So we get rewarded when he comes back. That's pretty simple. Verses 19, there it goes with those voices again, the voices and the lightnings and the thunders and the earthquake. Another pivot point. Now, the seventh bowls or vials are very similar to all this. That is found in Revelation 16:15, and it says that I come as a thief, and I must commend Robert Evans. He is one of the few people that believe in pre-trib that I've actually heard say this. He says that the coming of Jesus as a thief is not for us. The Bible does say that very clear, which gets skipped by people that believe pre-trib. It's the coming as a thief is for sinners. We will be watching, okay? And obviously, you can only watch something that's coming. You see that there's no invisible coming of Christ. But he does, to his credit, he says that, and I love him for that. That's awesome. Thank you, Mr. Robert Evans. So continuing, verse 16. Verse 16 says it's Armageddon, which happens before the coming of Christ. Verse 17 talks about the seventh bowl or seven vials, the same thing. The seventh one, not all seven of them. It also says that it is done. Now the basically says that the nations or the kingdoms of this earth will become the kingdoms of the Lord. He's now taken over. He's going to have his 1,000-year millennium. And here's the verses again. Verse 18. There's voices and earthquake and lightning and thunders. Like another pivot point is showing you it's the same part. So the seventh trumpet and the seventh bowl, they do line up. And then 19 gives you specific information only that mentions that the great city, most likely Jerusalem, is going to be divided into three parts. Verse 20 talks about the mountains and the islands they fled, just like Matthew 24 said, and just like Revelation 6 said. And the seventh bowl adds that there's going to be great hail. All right. Now, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, it talks about the coming of the Lord. And this is very clear. So please listen to this, okay? At the coming of the Lord, it's going to be a gathering together unto him, which we call the rapture, okay? But there's going to be a falling away first, that the people on the earth are going to have a coldness towards the Lord, and the Antichrist is going to be revealed, which happens in the middle of the 7-year tribulation. This is when he does something called the abomination of desolation. He goes in the temple, basically, he makes it seem like he's God, okay? There's another video you'll notice, I don't know if I made it yet. I think I just taught it in Sunday school that he's most likely Muslim, and he can't say that he's God himself, but like Jesus never actually said he was God, but he demonstrated he was God in things he did. While the Antichrist will most likely demonstrate that he's God in things that he will do, but not actually say that he's God, because Muslims, to their credit, they won't put up with that if he says that he's actually God himself. So, going back to 2 Thessalonians, it says that the coming of the Lord and the gathering together. So when he comes, there's going to be a gathering. But before the gathering, there's going to be the Antichrist first and the falling away. And I'm saying that's the explanation of the rapture, because the book of Thessalonians, they're basically confused, and they're saying, okay, we know about the second coming. We got that. Of the people that are dead. We got that part. But we don't understand what's going to happen to us. We're alive. So that's when Paul goes into the subject that the dead in Christ will rise first, and then we which are alive will be caught up. We're not going to stop the people that are dead, but we're going to meet them in the clouds. And that's all it is. That's all the rapture is. It's basically the catching away, this first resurrection, but they go first, and we go right behind them sometime soon after them. So the rapture is the second coming of the live saints, the people that are alive. That's all. That's no mystery here. Now, Jesus warns us about a secret coming. He says, be warned in Matthew and Mark and Luke that if they tell you I'm here, I'm in the desert, I'm in a closet, don't believe them. Because when I come, it's going to be a big deal. It's going to be lightning flashing, and everybody's going to see it, and it's so big. This is how big it is. The second coming of Christ is the biggest event in history. Is that big? It is not a secret. And there's only 2 resurrections. This is point 3. There's only 2 resurrections. And the first resurrection is, I'm surprised I don't have the verses here. I think I'll have the verses right after. The first resurrection is for the blessed, the people that are saved, okay? The second resurrection is for the cursed, the people that are going to hell. And that can be proven in the Bible, and I'll show you that in a second. It doesn't mean, the wrath doesn't mean the entire 7 year is a wrath. That doesn't mean that, okay? Because when he showed it, he showed the 6th seal, but he forgot to show the other seals. At that video anyway. All right, here are the verses. Revelation 20, verse 4. The dead in Christ reigned for 1,000 years with him. Now, you can't reign if you're dead, so something happened to them. Verse 5, it says that it talks about the non-believers first. The non-believers did rise again, but after the first resurrection. So obviously the first resurrection is for the people that were dead, okay? And here is verse 6. Blessed are those from the first resurrection where there is no more death. They won't be dying anymore. Now they'll have glorified bodies. Also, I want to add that we will physically be, because when Christ is coming, he's coming with his wrath. And the people that resurrect are coming down with him. We will have a glorified body. So the wrath of God is not going to affect us. We're going to be impenetrable. What's the word? We won't have any effect. The wrath won't have effect for us because we'll have glorified bodies. So first resurrection is for the blessed, for the people who go up in the rapture, and the people that are, dead. And the second resurrection is after the 1,000 years, after Christ has reigned. They will rise again, but they will be judged and go to hell. Now, recap. This is over. I'm just doing a recap. This guy has done a great job of putting verses together. This section here is for the seals. This section here is for the trumpets. And this section here is for the bowls. Okay, so when you read it, you'll understand a little bit easier. And you notice all the colors, he matched it up. And basically, the day of wrath is also called the great day of the Lord, or day of the Lord, or he has come, or the great day of his wrath. There's a lot of combinations of the same word. So look at that, push pause on this after you listen to the whole video, and push pause on that, come back to this and start looking at it, how everything matches, how the seals and the trumpets and the bowl, they match. They end almost at the same time, okay? But they seem to happen after the tribulation. It says after. And then the wrath happens. And then down here is where they have the matches of, this is once again, this is the, well, I'm not sure if this is, one of these is the trumpets, but they have the matches of the noise and the trumpets and the earthquakes. Just look at it. It's really good study. And the next following, I put some great graphs for you if you want to go into it deeper, okay? I'm not even going to go into that, but this is close to the last one, just more detail. And the next one, which I'm trying to get to, it won't change on me. There it is. This one basically, it doesn't do the whole Revelation. It might be 2 parts of this, but basically through the chapters of Revelation, it tells you what location is the seals and the trumpets. That's actually really helpful. And the next one, I'm trying to, there it is. It's basically like the first one I showed you, but a little bit more intense. So we're finished, and I'm trying to, it won't move. Well, thank you for supporting this channel. And again, I just want to say that Robert Evans and Alan Parr, they're good brothers. And, iron sharpens iron, and we all learn from each other. I definitely learn from them. Certain teachings, And, but the main thing is that no matter which one you believe, you need to get saved if you're not saved. You don't want God's wrath. You don't want hell, okay? And it's not just words you say when the preacher tells you to repeat after him. You have to follow him. Show fruits in your life, okay? And I thank you for supporting this Bible study. And the main way to support it is by listening to it all the way through. But if you would, I need a thumbs up in subscription because that helps you move along and other people can hear the teaching. And I appreciate that. And I've made it where if you're a deeper student of the word, you can continue studying this. But if you don't know too much, I made it where you can hopefully understand it. Because my saying is, this is the Bible Ranger, keeping the Bible simple yet rich in content. And that's what I was trying to do. And I apologize that it's 30 minutes, but it's an important study. Thank you very much.